Welcome to Outside Sales Talk, where we meet with industry experts to learn the strategies and tactics that make them successful. I'm your host, Steve Benson, and I've helped thousands of salespeople all over the world crush their quota. Today, I'll help you crush yours. Welcome back to Outside Sales Talk. Today, we're talking about the key to successful sales leadership. We've got Bernadette McClelland on the podcast today, and which I'm really excited about. Bernadette is the CEO of 3 Red Folders. It's a sales performance agency with a focus on sales leadership and human performance. She's a highly recognized sales authority and executive coach, well known for her expertise in neurosales, which sits at the intersection of psychology, science, and sales strategy, especially within the B2B sales space. Bernadette has over 20 years of sales experience working for top companies like Xerox and Kodak, and she's the author of 5 books, her latest being The Art of Commercial Conversations, When It's Your Turn to Make a Difference. As a keynote speaker, she talks about topics like start with who and the future of sales leadership. Bernadette, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to this one. 5 books now, huh? That's a lot of books on sales, I'll tell you.
Both, sales and leadership, personal leadership. So that's over a 20-year period, though. So, yeah.
Well, I think that qualifies as expertise. I've written 0 books in my life.
Well done. So there's huge potential for you then.
Right. I don't know if I have any good enough ideas to write a book about, but I'll work on that. That'd be a big step, I think.
Ideas are the easy part.
Well, what I'd love to start by talking about your book, The Art of Commercial Conversations. You talk about 9 commercial conversations that B2B sales executives need today, and that's really who listens to this podcast tends to be field salespeople selling B2B, their managers, VPs of sales in that field. So can you tell us about these 9 commercial conversations that you've kind of organized the world into and tell us why they're so important?
Yeah, so that's the book, The Art of Commercial Conversations, and so it's a model that I've created around conscious selling. And the market out there is changing at the moment, but there's still stuff from the past that we shouldn't discard. So if you can picture a 9-square model, and if we think of the 3 principles going down, we look at the approach the salespeople take to the sale, we look at the focus of their conversations, and we look at the outcome of those conversations. And then if we overlay that with 3 layers going across, I'm kind of trying to explain this with my hands here, and we look at the pathway, if you like, that sales has taken. So sales 1.0, from years ago was very much about, the approach was make contact, get out there, knock on doors, make phone calls, whatever it may have been. The focus of the conversation was content. It was just like, show up and throw up and here's my brochure and, all the spics and specs. And then the outcome was always that sign the contract. And so, that was the way of sales 1.0. Then in around the 80s, we had the likes of professional selling skills. We had Neil Rackham come in with spin selling. We had all these different methodologies come in. So we've kind of gone to sales 2.0, which is very much transitional. And the approach there, we learned how to connect, build rapport. We learned how to consult from the focus of the conversation, very much about asking consultative questions. And then the outcome was very much, it was very much conspiring for the success of our buyer. So customer sat came in, buyer experience, all of that stuff started to come in. And then where we are now, which I believe, we're at sales 3.0. And our approach to the market today, we don't get rid of what we've already learned. The fact of cold calling and picking up the phone, knocking on all of that kind of stuff, having our brochures, knowing our features, advantages, benefits, asking for the contract, all of that stuff still stays. We're simply stacking more on top of that we need today because our buyers are changing. So our approach to the market now needs to be steeped in conviction. And what I mean by that is, as salespeople, you know, you and I are salespeople as well. As salespeople going out to the market today, we need to do things differently. We need to think differently. And our need for understanding ourselves needs to change. And we need to go to market in this real state of conviction and differentiation. So we need to start to actually look at our own leadership skills, and the psychology, the way we think, and all the rest of it. Our approach, our focus on conversations today. We still need to know our product and the benefits and everything back the front. We still need to be able to sit in those conversations and be able to have consultative conversations. But what we need to do more of today is we need to understand within our conversations the art of context. We need to be able to contextualize those conversations and elevate them more to what's important to the buyer. And thirdly, our outcome, yes, we certainly need to be able to ask for the order, and we certainly need to conspire for the success of our client or our prospect. But we're reaching a stage in our social lives, our political lives, our economical lives, and that cuts across business, where we really need to be conscious and contribute to not just the growth of our business, but we need to really be in tune with what is going to make our buyer's business grow, which means some of those conversations or those consultative questions, the contextual, conversations, need to also be about how our client is actually going to help their client grow. So it's this ripple effect. So there are then 9 different conversations, if you like, in the conscious selling model, which my book is all about. Okay,
well that's an awesome concept. I really like it. So to make that real, let's role play. Let's walk through some specific conversations that a salesperson could have. That would how exactly would you do that? Like let's show our listeners how they can build a contextual model, how they can with their customer to create value. So like I'll be the person that you're selling to, and you be the salesperson.
So when we talk about conversations, there are no specific lines or sound bites. So let me answer that question for you. So if we look at, say, our approach to the market, let's just take the first pillar, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability for us, if we start from the top, because it's got to come from the inside out, which is, we've got to start with who. And so we looked at our levels of conviction, and we think to ourselves, okay, who am I as a salesperson?
Mm-hmm.
What are the questions that I ask myself before I go into a call? What are the questions that I perhaps ask myself that are not serving me? For example, do I have what it takes? Are they going to like me? All of those types of questions actually contribute to either us succeeding in that sales conversation or sabotaging ourselves.
So should we ask those questions of ourselves, or should we not?
We should change those questions. So let me give you an example, my example. Okay. So this is the way that I've actually, rolled it out for myself. Historically, in my sales career, there has been a question, and it may not even be just your sales career, it may be across your whole life. And there will be some kind of little question that you may ask yourself, or it could be a statement, for example, that is not serving you. So mine was, have I got what it takes? That was kind of like mine, going into a CEO meeting, going into a boardroom presentation, speaking on stuff, whatever it might be, have I got what it takes?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you think about that is all about me, but it's all about, the past as well.
Right.
And so if you can flip that and you can start to think about the people in front of you, and you can start to really own the strengths that you've got, that is number one. But it's also about what's your belief about sales. Because if you're thinking to yourself that salespeople are sleazy or con artists, or they're just out for themselves, if you think that about a salesperson, but your role is to sell, then there's going to be a massive disconnect when you actually go in to meet somebody, present, whatever it may be in that whole sales process.
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you a little bit of context around the conviction piece?
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely see how that gets in the way of a conversation where you're trying to be consultative and create value for your customer. What do you think the keys to being consultative and creating value are in these conversations?
Yeah, good question. The key part is to also understand why you're there. So if you're meeting with a client, for example, and you have to set yourself up. You're the one who's asked for this conversation. You're the one that's asked for this meeting. So it's up to you to actually lead the meeting. And so what I find is that a lot of salespeople will be great at building rapport, great at connecting. Most salespeople have got that down pat. The minute they sit down in front of the buyer, there's almost this awkwardness where the salesperson thinks, okay, who's going to go first, or what do I say? Or if the buyer actually jumps in first and kind of like says, okay, so what you here for? That throws the salesperson off. And what they will ultimately do is they will default to what they know best, which is all about them and their product. And what happens is when that happens, then one of two things happen. The buyer will say something along the lines of like, you know what, thanks very much, but we're right. Or they might say, so how much is it? And bang, before you know it, the salesperson's in a price-driven conversation. So it's that ability for a salesperson to be able to keep their emotions in check. Now, when I say keep their emotions in check, I'm not talking about, reaching for the Kleenex, or I'm not talking about, getting angry or anything like that, but it's disciplining their emotions so that they can actually hold themselves to their own sales conversation framework. And when they can do that, they can then take the conversation to a higher level, which is contextual, which is identifying what is really important to that buyer, either for that person individually or for that person's business. But it's a higher level conversation.
That makes a ton of sense. So specifically for outside sales managers, what type of leadership style do you think they should adopt, considering that they might not see their team in person as often?
Well, first, I think it depends on who is in the team, because if you've got people who, let's just say, might work really well on their own, but they may need company. For many of us, in the entrepreneurial space, we can work really, really well on our own, but if we lack that communication with somebody else to bounce ideas off, then it kind of spins it a little bit in the wrong way. So a sales leader, I think, with an outside sales team that could be remote or could be local, I think there's probably three areas that I think are really important. Number one is that they have the ability to actually coach. So we hear this a lot, but there's still a lot of managers out there that, sales managers or sales leaders that are actually still managing by numbers or managing, in a dictatorial way or whatever. But I think the best way to empower one of your sales teams or sales team members to be more high performing is to help them trust themselves. And I think that the only way that you can do that is to have them push their boundaries and feel really great about growth. And for a sales leader to actually ask the tough questions, to stay silent and not try to fix things, and to actually hold their team accountable. So I think coaching is really critical. Secondly, I think collaboration is really cool. So everybody in a team has got ideas of some, shape, form or another. And I think for the ability for a sales manager, a sales leader to be able to enable two-way communication. actually, there is a place for the sales manager to say to the team, hey, listen, guys, I'd love your feedback on this, or I don't have all the answers. So, I'd love some feedback. And I think thirdly is communicate in a way that is very much follow-up based more than check-up based. Because, I think, we've got millennials, well, we've actually got 4 generations of people out there in the workplace now. So they're all in differing, thought process and all the rest of it. And I think, if a sales manager can actually be motivating rather than micromanaging, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, there are several things you said there that really resonate with me. I'm always giving people the advice that they should be a coach in their leadership style when you're a sales manager. And to me, that means if you imagine a soccer coach or a basketball coach or whatever, a great coach won't say, hey, you've got to score more points. You got to make more goals. A great coach will say, hey, I noticed on that last drive that your left crossover was, when you it needed it could be a little tighter. If you turned your ankle like this, you could, make it a little more at this angle and accelerate better. Here's some drills that we could use to really make that work well. So identify a problem, and then they'll break up everything that you're doing into little pieces and identify the weak spots and help you strengthen in those places. And that's what a great coach does. They don't just demand results, but they also can help you develop your skills and see, be a zoomed out figure where they can kind of see from a distance, oh, okay, this is what you could do to be better. I see a coach doing that. And you also talked about collaboration, which is, I think one of the best things a great manager in sales will do is foster collaboration on the team by figuring out who in the team is great at which skill set, and then they'll look to duplicate that across the team. So if they figure out, hey, Susie is amazing at this aspect of lead generation. Why don't we enable Susie to be a leader on the team and give a talk to the rest of the team and show them how she's doing that, how she's being so successful. And if Joe is a really great closer, let's have him give a talk or share what he's doing to close so well. And I think having that community, that collaborative community on a sales team can really be powerful.
Yeah, it builds a culture, and that's the basis of a really good team.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
On the flip side, from your experience, what are some things that sales leaders need to do to stop, what do they need to stop doing that limit their success? What have you seen people doing that they shouldn't do?
Well, I think one of the things is exactly what you said about the coaching analogy. There's so many leaders out there that they ask for results without any form of coaching or instruction or something like that. And that's a key for failure. So if you think about, a typical sales process, you've got lead generation, you've got that client contact, you've got the discovery meeting, you've got whether you do a demonstration, a proposal, and you've got the close. So typically, you've got that whole process. And a lot of the times they just want results at that top line. But within each of those steps, there's a whole stack of different activities that are really key performance activities. So what I see is a lot of the times they're just, managing by KPIs and not actually looking at those activities and helping tweak those activities. So I definitely agree with you there. I think another thing that sales managers, have got to stop doing is they've got to stop pretending that they've got all the answers. And so, people like us who go out there and whose sole purpose is to help amplify the potential of salespeople, we get stuck. We get, our chokehold are the sales leaders. And they're the ones that need the most help, but they don't want to go up because then that would be a perceived failure in their job, that they need help. After all, what are they getting paid for?
Yeah.
But they also, have this whole thing that they don't want the team to see that there's any shortcomings that they may have as a manager. So I see that a lot, and the people in the sales performance industry see that a ton of times, and it's sad actually, because you've got this group of people, you've got salespeople that are just itching to grow themselves personally and professionally, and it's the chokehold is actually the sales manager. And then if we kind of take that to the next step down, sales leaders or sales managers are, I call it, the tail wags the dog. They're not holding their team accountable to anything. And it's this whole fear, especially if you've got sales people that have been promoted to the sales manager, and then all of a sudden they can't be one of the boys anymore, so they've got to lead them or manage them. And so holding people accountable is just doesn't happen. So they're probably the three things that I see out there that are the most sabotaging behaviors.
Yeah, and that definitely resonates with me too. And one of my biggest lessons, now being a leader in business, and that I guess I've learned probably in the last 5 or 6 years running this company that I run now, is that you have to not try to be the expert in everything, because you're really not the expert in anything. And early on in a company's lifestyle, I guess is especially relevant for people who found a company and then grow it. Early on, you are the expert in everything, you're, or at least most of the company, the part that you're running. But over time, you're bringing in people who are experts in different areas, like, marketing or PR, or, even an area that, like, I have relative expertise in sales, but a leader on my sales team, they have way more expertise in the area that they're dealing with on the sales team, because it's their whole job. And so that's, and I think leaders really do have to let go of that desire to be, or to, I don't want to say be the best at everything, but they have to let go of that illusion that they're supposed to be the expert in everything. Because they're not. Exactly. They can't be. No one can be everything to everyone. And if you don't let go of that, you really get in the way of your team.
I mean, you introduced me as an expert in this field of B2B selling. I've got a bookshelf here laden with books on psychology, on every form of selling. There are so many within the sales field. There are so many components to the sales performance industry, for want of a better word. Prospect, every single part of that. I am not an expert in every single part of that, so my experience is very much in the psychology behind building the people up to go do those things. So you're right, you're spot on. So I mean, we both go to people in our networks that have got the strengths in the areas that we don't have strengths in. So yeah.
I think it was Socrates that said, "I know nothing," and the wiser.
Yes.
The point being, the wiser you are, the more the more you realize how little
much you don't know. Exactly.
The deeper you go, the more you're like, wow, there's 1,000 PhDs in this space who have all got a deep expertise in some element of it. So
absolutely.
I know the cliff notes of a 20th of what they've done. So
yeah, that's for sure.
Well, I've heard your keynote that you do where you talk about how to start with why and the need for amplified intelligence.
Yeah.
Can you explain to our listeners what this means and how field salespeople can apply, how they can start with why and how they can have amplified intelligence?
So Simon Sinek, we all know, has this, the wonderful keynote, the TED Talk and everything on start with why. That's key. Like that is really important, starting with why. But one of our friends, like Socrates, I don't know, it was Descartes, I think it was, said, know thyself. And so I believe that with Simon Sinek's model, he's missing a key element. And I've written about this on a number of different blogs and whatnot. I believe that the missing circle, the inner circle, is actually who. It's actually who we are. And so I call that the change maker circle. And so starting with who is really all about creating the results that matter the most. So that's where I kind of bring in the science of, of our brain and our body and our behavior, bring all that in together and how that impacts business. And amplified intelligence is another keynote of mine. And that is all about the human approach to AI, to the AI trend, so as in artificial intelligence. And, there are 3 key principles within that keynote, and those principles are mental readiness, our intuition, and anti-fragility, which is beyond resilience, that actually will help us to adapt to the future of artificial intelligence. So I guess in answer to your question, salespeople can apply the principles of both by actually looking at their own personal leadership and the impact that has on how they sell, on their community, their clients, how they're perceived by, by their prospects, how they're perceived by their market, and how they're even perceived by themselves. But, like anything, it's only for those people that are growth focused.
All right. Well, for the next section, I have a series of questions that I'll ask in rapid fire succession, and the goal is to answer them in under 60 seconds. And it's called, I call this question Sales in 60 Seconds. So,
all right. Okay. Here goes.
So question 1, what is one thing that a lot of salespeople don't do enough of, or they neglect, but they should focus more on to become successful leaders?
I don't think that they question themselves enough. I don't think that they put their hand up enough. I don't think that they extend their learning enough. And I think what they do too much is they're too attached to getting a deal. And I think when you can lose the attachment to actually getting the deal, then, and I'm not saying you don't go for it, but you lose that emotional attachment, it's freeing. You are actually more present to the conversations.
Yeah, I had some interesting experiences on this when I was in sales. I found that if you're too attached to a deal, and if you feel like you can't lose a deal, then you certainly can't properly negotiate it. Like if a manager puts too much pressure on a rep to, you have to close this deal, you have to close this deal. It's like, well,
Absolutely.
If I have to close it, then I'm kind of hamstrung on the negotiation, because inherently, I think you have to be willing to lose a deal to negotiate it appropriately. And I'd much rather negotiate according to my plan and lose a deal, but generally get a higher price for deals than I would, do a deal where I lose money on it all said and done. Right. And so, and that was a key lesson for me early on was, it was that you can't be too attached. And is that what you mean by when you say attachment?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. So it was, this is going back a number of years when I was at Xerox, and I'd been working with this large account, and I used to sell, big ticket items for Xerox. So, the, $250,000 or whatever it was. And it was the end of the financial year, and my two layers of managers above me told me, it's about time, you've been working on this deal for over a year. We'd tried a couple of proposals throughout that year, and go out today, go sign the order. Here's the carrot to dangle in front of them. I didn't feel comfortable about it, but I went out anyway, and I sat down in front of the 2 decision makers that now knew me, and I had the paperwork with me, and I sat back, and they were there. End of the financial year, and I had the contracts, and I said, look, you guys know why I'm here. And I said, but I'm not going to ask you to sign the order. Now, what salesperson does that, by the way? but that was just intuition. And one of the senior ones said, we're so glad to hear you say that, Bernadette. He said, because had you have asked us again and dangled yet another carrot, you would not have got any business. I got a $500,000 business a month later. So, I'm not telling salespeople out there to not ask for the order, by the way. It's not about that. It was about listening to my gut, and it was based on my knowledge of the account as well. But that was a classic case of, me losing the attachment. I knew in my heart of hearts that I would get the deal, and it just didn't seem right. So, that's kind of, I suppose, my example of how that played out.
And that's why we have salespeople, is for that, or one of many reasons, for that intuition and for that judgment and for that knowledge of the specific customer. If it was as easy as just plugging and playing, then you wouldn't need them, but it never is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next question, what is your tip for outside sales leaders to create a high performance and growth based sales culture?
So this is really important to me, because salespeople can come along and they can sell themselves beautifully in an interview, and they come on board and they might go through their probation period or what have you, but ultimately the true colors come out. And so for me, if a sales organization is really, really, really serious about a high-performing sales culture, they need to have a baseline. So they need to have some starting point. And that is understanding the people that they've got in the seats at that point in time, from their ability to their mindset. And when I say mindset, it's real mindset stuff. It's like, do they want the job? Are they committed? Are their motivation levels? Have they got responsibility? Or are they someone who blames blames the economy, the pricing, the company or whatever, and makes excuses? It's based on another bucket, which is basically their skill set as far as hunting and qualifying, consulting, all of that. You need to know that. But then there's a whole nother bucket, which is, how can you measure your salesperson's beliefs around money, for example? Because what if you have a salesperson who, and most salespeople, or most of us, have come from a family environment where perhaps dad worked a couple of jobs, and there may not have been a lot of money, and so with that comes a whole set of beliefs around money. So if you've got a salesperson, for example, that thinks $100 or $1,000 is a lot of money, but they're selling something for $100,000, then there's going to be some kind of a mismatch. And I know that for a fact from myself. There's deals that I could have just blitzed in the earlier days, but never pitched that top product because I thought it was too expensive. So how can you start to, measure their need for approval? You know what? I want that buyer to like me. I want that buyer. I don't want them to think I'm a salesperson. So, oh gosh, I'm not going to ask those hard questions. So once again, you've got a pipeline that's bloated. So I am a big advocate. I'm a partner, a global partner of the Objective Management Group, and we use this brilliant science-based, evidence-backed evaluation. So for me, for a salesperson who is deadly serious about a high-performance culture, they need to measure their people. That's my take.
That makes sense. Can you tell me about a mistake you made during your sales career, and how did you learn from it?
I have shared this one before. It's a bit embarrassing, but
I like the embarrassing ones.
That's kind of so I had this account, and I had a portfolio of accounts, and I had this. It was here in Melbourne, and it was the account was called the Williamstown Dockyards, and it was on the other side of Melbourne, very industrial. All the container ships came in. The docks. It was the dockyards, and I never went and visited because I had this picture in my head that there would be some dirty little tin shed, and there'd be workmen with their hard hats on, and there'd be this filthy printer stuck in a corner. And so it was one day, I decided I'd go for a drive, and I thought, look, I'll just go over the bridge, and ended up going down that way and thought, oh, this place is here somewhere. I better, say I've been. And there's this multi-story building, 5 stories. They were a company that actually had just won the tender to build all the frigates for the Australian Navy. And so I ended up going through a couple of iterations and ended up getting a deal just shy of $1 million out of that account. So from a mistake perspective, I did it hard to get the deal. And my learning out of that was never make any assumptions and visit every single one of your accounts as soon as you can.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
Well, can you name one essential habit or trait that will lead to greater success in sales?
I think it comes back to you want someone on your team as a leader who has the desire to do the job, because that job means something to them. But outside of that is you want somebody who is committed. But I'll ask this question to salespeople if I'm doing a training or a workshop. I'll say, hands up those of you who are committed. And everyone puts their hand up. Everyone's committed to success, and everyone will put their hand up. Of course, everyone's committed to success. But my next question is, how many of you are committed to success in selling? Because there are so many things in the sales, role that salespeople will shy away from. So they lack that commitment. So I think, if you were to sit down and analyze those two words, desire and commitment, I think that you would find that they're probably, two key habits or traits that they need. Definitely commitment.
And could you give an example of some things that you don't feel like salespeople?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll ask any sales, your listeners there who are sales leaders, how many of their people will keep the CRM updated? How many of their people will hand their reports in on time? How many of their salespeople will pick up the phone and have a consistent prospecting, pick up the phone or go on LinkedIn or whatever the process is in that company, that have a consistent processing rhythm?
So given your expertise in sales leadership, what's the best advice that you could give our listeners who want to become successful sales leaders?
Behave, dress, talk, and think like the successful person you want to become.
And and as a final takeaway, what's the first step that they could do to accomplish that?
Is to, I think, the word leadership, it's just such a broad term. And when we think of leader, we tend to think of somebody who's a boss or somebody who's a manager or somebody who's higher up that hierarchy. But when we consider the fact that it's not about being the leader, it's actually about being a leader. And so every single one of us, has the potential to be a leader. And I think when you start to shift your thinking, you start to act, you start to, dress, you start to behave like that, it's almost like you are perceiving yourself to be that leader already. Excellent advice.
Well, I like to try to do a 1-minute summary of everything that we've talked about, just because a lot of people are driving and on the road in field sales, and so they're listening to this on the road and they can't take notes. When you hear something twice, it sticks. So I'll try to summarize everything we've talked about here in a minute or so. So first, the focus of sales conversations has changed a lot in the last years, and we need to be more consultative and understand the art of context. Find out what's important to the buyer and what will make their business grow in your conversations. Before going into a meeting, you need to get into the right mindset. It's important to discipline your emotions so you can take the conversation to a higher level, a contextual level, and truly identify the buyer's needs. You set up the meeting, so make sure that you're leading it and that make sure that you're in charge of the conversation. Bernadette mentioned 3 areas that sales managers should focus on to become successful leaders. 1, develop a great ability to coach, meaning not leading by the numbers or by the spreadsheet, but helping your team members trust themselves and pushing their boundaries to help them grow. 2nd, foster collaboration within your sales team and build a great culture. And 3rd, communication is crucial. and it should be more follow-up based than checkup based. As a manager, it's important to look at and analyze the individual activities that lead to reaching certain goals and not just look at the end results and KPIs. Sales leaders need to get comfortable with not always being the expert. It's okay to not know everything, and you should always keep learning and growing. Instead of just looking at the why, we should also consider the who. Look at your own personal leadership style and what impact you make for the people around you. How are you perceived by your buyers? How are you perceived by the market? And how do you see yourself as a seller and as a leader? We need to move away from being too attached to the deal in order to have better conversations and provide more value to buyers. To succeed in sales, you need to be fully committed and have the desire to do the job and give it your all. This involves being consistent in your performance and also doing tasks that are not the most pleasant all the time. Bernadette's last advice is to behave, dress, talk, and think like the successful person that you want to become. Shift your thinking to perceiving yourself as a leader, because we all truly have that ability in ourselves. Well, Bernadette, this has been a fantastic episode, and I really appreciate you coming on board and chatting with us today. Where can our listeners read more about your work, and where can they reach out to you?
LinkedIn. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so please connect with me there. Bernadette McClelland. Through Red Folders is my company page, and my company website through redfolders.com, and BernadetteMcClelland.com is my speaker web page. Outside of that, I'm also on Twitter, and the handle is B_McClelland. So reach out, connect with me, and I look forward to connecting with those of you who do.
Fantastic, Bernadette. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed this episode of Outside Sales Talk. If anyone has any feedback or suggestions, always feel free to reach out to me at feedback@outsidesalestalk. Feedback, I can never say this. Feedback@outsidesalestalk.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to it and leave us a review. It really helps us spread the word and get the word out to more outside salespeople like you to find out about us. Thanks again, Bernadette, for joining.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.